Here's what I think has been going on. For 30 to 40 years, the establishment, the wealthy business elite at the top of our society, in cahoots with the leaders of the two major parties, ran a pretty good show. They exchanged governments between Republicans and Democrats. They all knew each other. They all understood each other. And they had the mass of the American people pretty much under control, or it seemed that way, both at home and abroad. But over the last 30 or 40 years, unfortunately, those very people used their control of the government to gather more and more wealth into their hands, to become bigger and bigger and richer, powerful capitalists like the Koch brothers, but many others. And so they lost their hold on the mass of people. That's why those folks turned against the establishment of the Republican and the Democratic parties and gave Mr. Trump the surprise of everybody that he won the election. And now he is living out the non-establishment, the non-polite. It's not that he necessarily steals more than others, but he's not going to hide it. He's actually going to wear it as a badge of his difference. And I think it's a sign of a system in very serious trouble and unable to come up with a solution. Masses of people voted for Mr. Trump out of the notion that the establishment wasn't their friend anymore and wasn't something to rely on. And as Mr. Trump proves that he isn't either, you're going to see a mass of Americans looking elsewhere for how to deal with the deterioration they feel and see around them all the time.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Is Trump's kleptocracy a continuation of neoliberalism and or Reaganomics, or is it something new? And along the same lines as the last question, I'd love to hear your definitions of neoliberalism and Reaganomics.
Okay, Reaganomics has always been a mystery to me. If you listen closely to Mr. Reagan at any point in his life, I'm going to try to be polite now, his grasp of economics was not his strong suit. So I really don't understand it. What it seems to mean is that when he became president, he set about deregulating the economy, having the government play a smaller role in regulating, and turning over government activities to private enterprises for their private profit. Beyond deregulation and privatization, I have no idea what Reaganomics is supposed to mean. Neoliberalism is a little different. Neoliberalism is the idea that deep down philosophically, we should go back to what used to be called laissez-faire. That is, the government should play an absolutely minimum role. It's really a kind of religion. Government in economics is bad, private enterprise is good. It is the literal counterpoint to some kinds of socialism which run it the other way. What the government does is good, and what private folks do isn't. This is childish, extreme, logical, kind of strange debate of people who box themselves into extreme corners. Most societies, if you look at them, certainly ours, are a complex mixture of private and public, and that has been validated and verified by generations. Back to your first question. I do think, and I go out a bit on a limb here, but I do think that we are in a stage of capitalism where we at least have to ask the question, is this system imploding on itself? Have we had 300 years of a good run of a capitalism that did achieve a number of goals, that did achieve a number of advances for the human community, much as earlier systems did, but like those systems, it has run its course. It is now functioning for such a small slice of folks at the top that it is creating its own internal enemies and building them up with anger and resentment to the point where the president, makes money off of his job and has the same kind of attitude that is attributed to one of the Louis before the French Revolution. I'm having a good time. After me, the deluge will come. And that Mr. Trump is sort of playing that kind of role.
Remarkable. Back in 1944, Vice President Henry Wallace warned about the rise of people he called American fascists. He described them in a New York Times op-ed as people who, quote, claim to be super patriots, but they would destroy every liberty guaranteed by the Constitution. They demand free enterprise, but are the spokesman for monopoly and vested interest. Their final objective, toward which all their deceit is directed, is to capture political power so that, using the power of the state and the power of the market simultaneously, they may keep the common man in eternal subjection, end of quote. Do you think that's an accurate description of what Trump is up to here?
Absolutely, but I wouldn't limit it to Mr. Trump. I think Henry Wallace had a very clear vision. He was a visionary, as we know, basically, looking back on him. And he understood, especially in a capitalism that has reduced the number of wealth and power holders to a relatively small number, the richer the minority gets, the more urgent it has to control politics, lest the majority, recognizing that it's a majority, do what majorities can do. And in order to prevent that, you have to buy and control the political apparatus. That's what the two parties allowed themselves, the Republicans with enthusiasms, the Democrats with perhaps some hesitation. But in the end, they've become beholden to the big bucks, and so they've behaved in a corresponding way. And we are now at the end result of that behavior when the mass of people basically said, no, we're going to vote for the guy you make fun of, Mr. Trump. It's like the British working class saying to their establishment, we're voting to leave Europe, basically because you tell us not to, and we don't trust you, and we don't like you, and we're on the way to a country that's going to be split between the minority that controls everything and the majority that feels fundamentally taken advantage of.
Yeah. The Financial Times has a piece out about, in fact, it was in today's paper, maybe it was first published yesterday, about the rise of collateralized loan obligations, CLOs, which are basically the new version of the collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs, that caused the 2008 financial crisis. They're bundles of junk loans that end up getting rated as AAA. What is it about our financial system that has led us to make the same mistakes over and over again?
It's basically what I just said. If you give private banks, who are major creators and dealers in collateralized debt obligations, in collateralized loan obligations, in the whole world that we call derivatives and so on, if you allow them the political power, that is, the right to use their enormous concentrated wealth to buy and shape politics, then you really can't be surprised if they either prevent something like the Dodd-Frank bill from ever achieving what it was set out to do, or if they can't prevent it from being passed, then prevent it from being executed, from being really administered, which they've been very successful at, getting exemptions from the Securities and Exchange Commission and all the other maneuvers. Then you're going to get what we have now, namely a profit opportunity exploited by people who have no internal limits in this process and will blow it up in the future the way they did in 2008. And the Financial Times at least has the courage to see it, to point to it, and to say, look, before it's too late, recognize that the same forces we know are capable of destroying the global capitalist system are doing it again. But even if you see it, even if the Financial Times makes it clear, as long as the political power that has the decision-making is beholden to the big bucks that have concentrated all that wealth, we will see it. But like people on a train rushing into a stone wall, we'll stare and look at our own doom coming down the road toward us.
Yeah, it's not an encouraging, sign. And the Financial Times said, you know, we're right back at 2008. It's remarkable. Professor Richard Wolff, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Tom.